What's up everyone? Welcome or welcome back to the Marketing Nomad YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about how to stop negative self-talk. And I think that this is going to be a slightly longer episode just because I have that much to share with you. I mean, this is decades of experience that I wish to share with you. And the reason why I'm going so much into detail about this is because this has actually been one of my biggest struggles in my life. Today, my relationship with myself is very, very grounded, very rooted in self-love, compassion, and kindness, like unconditional love that I have for myself. But it took me a very long time to get here, and it was also a very difficult journey for me to get here. So I wanted to share my entire journey with you to let you know that I've come here after a lot of hard work, and it's taken me so much time to get here. It didn't happen overnight. So if you are looking to stop your negative self-talk, just know that you can definitely come to a point where you eliminate it completely from your system and you are showing up for yourself from a place of unconditional love, kindness, and compassion. But it is also a process to get there. It doesn't happen overnight. All right, so I want to take my time and share my entire journey because there's just so much of details that went into me becoming this version of myself today. All right, and I hope that by sharing my journey, it helps you feel more seen, and it helps you recognize that these struggles are actually very real and they happen to everyone, and it is part of the process and the journey of learning how to love yourself unconditionally. All right, okay, so let's talk first about why we actually engage in negative self-talk. Now, the first thing that I had to understand about negative self-talk was that it was not who I was. I think that because I had engaged with it for such a long time in my life, especially during the formative years of my life, I kind of associated that with who I was rather than that being a habit that I had picked out. And so one thing that I had to recognize was this was a habit. And the moment I recognized that this was a habit, it helped me detach from it. It was no longer who I was as a person. It was not a part of my identity that I had to hold on to or had to grip to, but it just became a habit that I could choose whether or not I could engage with it or to remove it from my system. Now, when it comes to negative self-talk, oftentimes the internal dialogue that we have is very critical, very judgmental, and the worst of all, very self-sabotaging. There are different reasons why we end up engaging in negative self-talk. First reason could be perhaps we grew around caregivers who spoke that way to themselves or who spoke that way to us, and we ended up internalizing their conversations with us. That's one way that it could have started for you, this habit that you picked up. Another way that we tend to engage with negative self-talk, the reason for it is maybe past trauma. Maybe for me, example, I'm going to take myself as an example. So while growing up, I was subjected to a lot of harsh criticism, whether it was in school, just the constant bullying that I went through as I was growing up. And I think that one of the ways that I dealt with it as a kid and as I continued to grow into my teens is I started picking out my perceived flaws and putting it out there so that it would protect me when someone else pointed it out to me. I'd be like, yeah, I already know about this. You can't hurt me, And that continued even as I was in my teens. There was a lot of bullying in my life. I mean, you don't have to feel bad for me just because I did stand up to my bullies multiple times, and I'm very proud of, how brave I was back then. But this was the way that I stood up to them. It was kind of like, you can't get to me because I know my perceived flaws. So whatever you tell me about myself, I already know it, and it's something that I'm joking about. It's something that I am, kind of telling it to everyone. I am being nonchalant about it. And so that was a way for me to protect myself from very critical people that I had while growing up, well into my teen years as well. It was also my defense mechanism from getting hurt. All right, so that was me. All right, I'm pretty sure that there are many other reasons. Another reason that comes through is we feel that it can be a source of motivation. If we're being hard on ourselves, then we're pushing ourselves. There's nothing wrong with it, is the thought process that sometimes comes through as well. And that also I've seen myself do as well. Sometimes I've engaged in negative self-talk because I felt that I needed to be pushed harder or I was not doing enough. And that feeling of inadequacy was kind of raising my insecurities, I guess I would say. And in order to battle that, rather than dealing with my insecurities and working through them, I thought that this was a better way to deal with it. All right. So, like I said, it does lead to a lot of self-sabotaging tendencies. Of course, there are plenty more reasons, where this negative self-talk habit comes along, but these are a few that have personally come up for me, right? So understanding where that negative self-talk habit came from was very, very important for me because that helped me realize that I learned it. So if I learned it, I can unlearn it as well. So that was like a very, very big shift for me. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about why I decided to even go this route. All right. So for me in 2019, I had a complete breakdown of my life, complete. Every single aspect of my life that I thought was steady, stable, every aspect of it was broken down. And of course, if you want to know more about it, you can read it in my book, 0 to 4 Figures. I explain it in extensive detail in that. But, just the shortened version was that I had a complete breakdown of my life. And in the spiritual aspect of it, we call it a spiritual awakening. And that was my first big one, spiritual awakening. And so at that point, I think I was feeling I was just feeling very dissatisfied with how my life had been going, for about a decade and a half up until that point. This was sometime, I think I was around 25, 26 when this happened. Yeah. So for a good decade and a half, my life had been constantly filled with one battle after the other and one battle after the other, one pain after the other. And it was not normal pain. I think the magnitude of what I had been through or what I was going through up until that point, I didn't see anyone else going through it. And so I didn't understand why I was just in such constant pain for about 15 years of my life. And it was very, very difficult for me to cope with what was happening, like the complete breakdown of my life. And so at that point, I had no choice but to look inwards. I think that sometimes life puts you through a very, very difficult circumstance so that you stop looking outward for excuses about why your life is the way that it is, and it helps you start looking inwards and helps you start taking responsibility for the life that you have created up until that point. And this was one of those moments for me. And so one thing that I realized common to everything that I'd been through, the painful things that I'd been through in the last 15 years up until that point, I realized the common denominator to that was me, And the more I understood that, the more I started taking responsibility for my life. And that was the starting point for me to recognize that I needed to build a healthy relationship with myself. If I was creating the life that I am leading, then I better have a better relationship with her. I have to have a healthy relationship with her. And so that triggered the entire thought process of how to love myself absolutely unconditionally, how to have absolute faith in myself, and most importantly, how to have kindness and compassion for the person that I was yesterday, today, and the person that I was evolving into tomorrow. And so that began my journey to reframe my thought process when it came to how I was speaking to myself. And I gotta tell you, at this point, I was off the wagon. Like it was so bad. My negative self-talk, like I told you, it was a defense mechanism that had been built over so many years, and it was very, very strong. It was kind of like this wall that I built, so strong so that no one could touch me. And that by itself, of course, was my ego speaking, right? It was my ego self talking and making sure that no one could hurt me. But actually, that was how deep my wounds were. That's where your ego self comes in. It comes in to protect you. It comes in to shield you from the wounds that you have, or shield you from more pains as you are handling the wounds that you do have. And so for me, it was understanding that, okay, well, let's talk about my relationship with myself. How am I speaking to myself? And that was one question that was so powerful for me, because I realized that how I was speaking to myself, yeah, I would not allow anyone to talk like that to any of my loved ones or even my best friends. I would never, every time someone would speak that way to my best friend or someone that I loved, I would step in and I say, hey, no, that's not the way that you speak. And I have been that fierce and very, very protective of my loved ones, right? So I was like, if I'm not allowing someone to speak that way to my loved ones and, my best friends, then why am I allowing myself to speak like that to myself? And so that again triggered another thought process saying, okay, well, we've got to figure out how to speak to myself, because first off, every time I engaged in negative self-talk, it was pulling me down even more. I was feeling very, very frustrated with the image that I was showing myself. I didn't like that image, and that to me didn't feel like an accurate image of myself. It felt like I was projecting someone else's image, and constantly berating myself also was putting me really, really low. And that was a point in my life where I was feeling that internal pull to rise. So I would not be surprised if you too, if you've clicked on this video, you too have been feeling like your negative self-talk has been draining you. It's not been protecting you. It's no longer making you feel better, but it is starting to affect your mental health, your emotional health, and to an extent your physical health as well. And you're also starting to feel that resistance every time you engage in negative self-talk. You feel that something's off, something's wrong in the way that you're speaking to yourself. Yeah, that would be, your subconscious kind of bringing it to your attention that it's not working for you anymore. And that was one thing that I had to recognize as well, because at one point, this negative self-talk was actually protecting me. It was not the healthiest approach to what I was going through. However, I had to honor that it was protecting me. I also had to recognize that this was a habit that I picked up from someone else. All right, so I had to honor that part of the process, that I just thought it was right, and then I did it for myself. So I had to show kindness and compassion, not just for myself, but also maybe perhaps from the people that I picked it up from. And that by itself helped me calm down a lot about how I was engaging with negative self-talk. All right. So that is my journey. That was the starting point. 2019 is when I started to reframe my thought process. Another thing that just came to my mind is the relationships that I had had up until that point. Oh my gosh, they were very, very unhealthy, and some of them were very healthy. Yes, I completely honor those, but most of them were very unhealthy and were the source of a lot of pain for me during those years. And when I took a deeper look at those relationships, I realized that whatever relationship I had with myself, these relationships were mirroring that, which means I was accepting myself talking all of these, negative things about myself. And so I was accepting it from other people as well. So if other people were talking negative about me, constantly berating me, constantly putting me down, I was accepting that because I was accepting myself doing it to myself. you know? So that by itself helped me understand that the relationship that I have with myself is, for first and foremost, the most important relationship that I will ever have. And every other relationship that follows the relationship that I have with myself will always be a mirror to that. All right. So that was also another way that I started taking responsibilities for the relationships in my life that were very unhealthy, that were not serving me at all. That was starting to feel that misalignment in them. And that was also kind of a trigger point for me to start working on my relationship with myself. All right, we'll get a little bit deeper into this in just a little while. But I do want to say that for me, when I realized this, it was a bit of a shock, because up until that point, I think that I blamed it on everybody else. Like, oh, okay, that person is toxic, so that's why I'm suffering, or that person is unhealthy, that's why I'm suffering. But when I started pointing the finger to myself and saying, hey, no, that's just a mirror of the relationship that you have within yourself, that's when it completely flipped, because that meant that I have control over the relationships that are there in my life, or even what was happening in my reality, because every single aspect of it was dependent and was related to the relationship that I had with myself. All right. So that was also a point where I started working really, really hard towards just having a healthy relationship with myself. All right. Now let's get into what harmful effects can come out of negative self-talk. So first off, what I realized was it really, just elevated my stress levels. And even though I was the most confident person to everyone else outside, I could feel it chipping away at my self-confidence from within. I could feel it internally. Another thing was the constant negativity around me was just getting to me. It was just not putting me in a healthy state of mind. And I realized that because I was being harsh on myself, I was also being harsh on the people that I loved and the people around me. I held myself to impossible standards, and so I felt internally that it was right for me to put them against impossible standards, and that led to a lot of friction in my relationships, at least some of them that could have been more healthier at that point in time. It was leading to a lot of friction there. So that was also one more aspect that I realized, hey, something needs to change over here. Something's not going right. And it all starts with you. You've got to take responsibility for your actions at this point. And whether or not it was external actions, internally, a lot needed to shift within me. So this was that point where I'd been kind of I had hit rock bottom, so there was nowhere else for me to go other than to look at myself in the mirror and to start working on myself so that I could rise. That was that point for me. Sometimes I think that life makes you hit rock bottom, that you have no choice. You have no choice but to start looking at how you have contributed to where you are at, and more importantly, however painful it is to accept, you have created your reality. All right? Okay. So now let's talk a little bit. I'm just looking at my notes at this point, but yeah. So now let's talk a little bit about the steps that I took. All right? Because like I told you, this was a very, very long process for me, and it took a lot of conscious, intentional steps on my end, and for a very, very long time as well. Today, it's just very automatic. It's a reflex, but it took a lot of time to get here. I cannot stress on this enough. It took a lot of intentional efforts, a lot of stumbling, a lot of moments where I was constantly wondering, is this ever going to happen? Like, can I ever reach that state of, unconditional love for myself? Yes, I've had those thoughts as well. And the reason why I'm sharing with you is because I know that this is going to be a particularly difficult journey. But if you keep at it, if you're consistent and you are intentional, all right, you will get there. I just want to say this. It's difficult, it's long, but you will get there. All right? Okay. So The first step, let's talk about it, all right? So for me, the first one was, of course, to recognize, to become aware of that voice. I had internalized this negative self-talk to such an extent that I didn't even know when I was talking down to myself. Like I told you, right? I had kind of masked it as humor. So I would just joke casually and say, well, you know how dumb I am, or, and I'll just laugh about it. So I wasn't aware that my negative self-talk was also coming out this way. So for me, one of the first steps was to recognize and become aware of this voice. The more obvious ones are the ones where you are angry, you're frustrated with yourself, or you're sad, and then you kind of engage in that negative self-talk. But there are others where I was just happy, but at the same time, it was a lot of that defense mechanism coming to play, and I was like, yeah, you know how dumb I am, or I would just laugh, and I thought that just because I laughed at it, it would mean that it was okay. But no, even that was actually getting to me, and I realized that that was negative self-talk as well. So categorizing that, even if it was under the mask of humor, was one of the biggest steps that I took with respect to negative self-talk. And I think it was just like one day when I decided no more jokes about myself. No more jokes about myself, even if it is funny, even if it is perceived as harmless, because over time, these little jokes that I was making about myself, first off, it was allowing other people to pick up on that and to keep talking about it as well. So it's not just me chipping away at myself, it was other people, it was me allowing other people also to chip away at myself. So it was kind of like double, triple the effect of that one joke that I was making, or multiple jokes. So you can imagine how many times it was kind of chipping at me. So that was the point. I was very strict with myself. I said no more. All right. It doesn't matter if you're no longer the funniest person in the room, but no more jokes like that. All right. And that was very serious. I was very, very serious about it. And I was as serious as I am right now talking to you. And that was it. That was the last moment that I ever joked about myself or put myself down in front of other people. And that was the recognition stage. All right. So it was recognition. And that by itself was one of the first steps, Another thing that I realized, so this was the humor part of it, right? So the other thing is, I'm good for nothing, or if I'm not perfect, then I'm a failure, constantly just telling myself all of that. Yeah, I had to take a couple of steps with respect to that. So let's get into detailing of the steps that I took with respect to the inner dialogue that I was having, because the external one, I was like, no more jokes, nothing at all. And that was the end of it. I'm very serious when it comes to myself. Yes, I do know that. But at the same time, like, I was also very, very kind and compassionate. I was like, I understand where this is coming from. I know why you've been doing this, but it's time. It's time to let that go. All right. So that was one. Now let's come into the steps that I took with respect to the inner dialogue that was happening within me. All right. So for me, there are a lot of things running in my mind all the time. All right. And it's going like 1,000 miles an hour. So for me in particular, these thoughts were running so fast that I couldn't keep up with them. It was very, very difficult for me to catch up to them or to recognize them and say, hey, stop running. I need to work on you. It was very, very difficult for me, okay? And so what I did, as I do with all of the thoughts that I can't seem to handle in my mind, is I started writing, all right? So what I did was I took, like, how you have 2 pages of a book, right? So on one side, I started writing these thoughts down, all right? Whatever the thoughts were, I did not judge myself for it. I just wrote them down. I kind of, there's something that I do that has really worked for me is I know how to switch into a third party. As in, I know how to switch into a neutral party, someone outside of who I am and what I'm doing. So this person that I step into, well, she doesn't judge. She's just noting all the thoughts and she's just being, all right? And she's just there to do a task. So I'm very good at that. I think that that's something that I've learned over the years. I don't know where that came from. I got to sit and figure it out. But that's something that I'm really good at. So I started writing these thoughts as a neutral party. I'm not going to judge. I don't even need to know where these thoughts are coming from. I am just going to write down these thoughts as and when they came. So I would keep one line per thought. Okay, so for example, the thought was, if I'm not perfect, I'm a failure. Let's take that. If I'm not perfect, I'm a failure. Or if I don't do this perfectly, it's going to be a failure. I'm a failure, or I'm failing at this. All right, so I would write it all on the left side of the page. Now I would get to the right side of the page. At the same line, I would reframe those thoughts. Now, this was a really, really good way for me because first off, I was putting it all down on paper. It was not something that was running in my mind that I couldn't catch. It was all on paper, all right? Because it was all on paper, it made it more tangible for me to work through it. When it's in your mind, and this is something that I've noticed, it is just so up in the air. I mean, there's so many things that we're thinking about, right? It's very, very difficult to kind of work on them. So for me, when I put it on the paper, it's not moving anymore because it's on the paper, right? It's not moving anymore. So I can catch it and I can sit with it. I can work on it. I can take my time to think about it. So whatever was on the paper, I started reframing it on the right side of the page. Now, this took a long time. Let me tell you, this took a very, very long time to reframe those thoughts, all right? It didn't come as a reflex for a very long time. Sometimes I had to go back to my book, my journal, and say, okay, well, this was the thought, this was my reframe, let's reframe it. So it's that intentional steps that I had to keep taking again and again and again and again, and I will say it again and again, because it was that many times until one day it became a reflex for me to switch those thoughts, all right? Okay, so that helped me a lot. So whatever was the negative thought, I shifted it into a more kinder, a more compassionate voice. I was not forcing positivity, absolutely not. I was still being realistic, I was still being grounded, but I was also being kind, I was also being compassionate, and I was showering myself with unconditional love. And it was easier for me because I had time to get into that mode and then write it down. It was not these random thoughts that I had to shift through and focus on shifting myself. No, it was on the paper, it was not running anywhere. So I had enough time to reframe, to calm myself down, to say, okay, well, if I were being kind to myself and compassionate to myself, what would this sentence be? Not forcing positivity, being realistic, but how could I be more unconditional in my love? Another way that I would reframe this, that would help me reframe this thought process was to ask myself, okay, well, this is the sentence that I have. Now, if I were to tell it to my best friend or my loved one, how would I say this? How would I want them to hear it? Because I didn't know how to say it, right? Like I told you, I was already being very, very harsh and critical sometimes. So I didn't trust myself to say it. So I was like, okay, well, if someone else is saying it to them, how would I want them to say it to my friend or my best friend or my loved one? And then I would write that down. It took some trial and error to get to a point of that unconditional love, that kindness and that compassion, but it does come through. Because to be very honest with you, and we'll get a little bit into the 5D aspect of it in just a bit, but there is a version of you that is naturally unconditional, with your love, with your kindness and your compassion. You just have to tap into that energy. We'll get into this in the 5D aspect of this podcast episode. Like I said, this is going to be a long one. We're going to be here for quite some time. All right, so there is a version of you that exists, that is kind to yourself, that is compassionate, that has unconditional love for yourself. You just have to take some time, pause, and tap into that energy, tap into that version of you. All right, so for me, writing this thought down just made it so much more easier for me. Now, if I couldn't think of something aligned, what I would do is I would just try to understand where I was coming from with that particular thought. All right, so even that, just giving a backstory to that thought, like, oh, okay, well, I went through so-and-so circumstance, it did not work out for me, and that's why I'm feeling this way. So that was also another way that helped me calm my thoughts down with respect to the negative self-talk. And then I started to ask myself, all right, well, I understand that did not work out, all right? But what was the takeaway there? And then I would go back and say, hey, no, I was not a failure there. I actually learned so many lessons there. I evolved as a person, and perhaps much later in my life, I actually used those lessons into something else that, made me become much more successful or made that process a lot easier. So it's not a failure per se. It was not that I was a failure, because I learned from that experience. I grew from that experience. So no, I am not a failure. Yeah, the thing stops at 30 minutes. Sometimes I forget, sometimes I remember to switch it off just before that, but this time I forgot. Okay, so where was I? I was talking about how I was like, okay, well, but I am not the failure there. Whatever happened failed. That doesn't mean I am the failure, because I learned, I evolved. I took those lessons and I actually applied it somewhere else. So no, that I wasn't the failure there. Whatever that was failed. So I started detaching myself from events in my life that did not work out, that were causing all of this negative self-talk. Another thing that I started recognizing was, oh, okay, well, this was there as a defense mechanism. So now let's kind of dig deeper about the wounds that led to that defense mechanism. And then I started working on that. Of course, that kind of gets into very, very deep shadow work that I did actually engage with for a very long time, and I still do as well. It's a lifelong process. So, but that gets a little bit deeper into shadow work. We'll probably have another episode for that. But I do want to say that that helped me kind of get deeper and deeper into understanding why I was the way that I was. And the more that I understood that, the more I had just so much of love, so much of compassion for what I had been through, the person that I was forced to be because of what I had been through, or the person that I had to become in order to protect myself. And that by itself, like, I'm almost tearing up over here, because it was a lot. It was really, really a lot. And those realizations, it just helped me tap deeper into the unconditional love that I always had for myself, but just was buried very, very deep, and I could no longer access it. All right. So understanding where you're coming from, understanding the source of that negative self-talk, that particular sentence or that particular phrase that you're using for yourself, that could also help you as well. Now, the next step that I took, and this was, I'm so glad that I thought about it this way. So you know how I started perceiving it as a habit, right? So I was like, okay, if it's a habit, then I can train myself out of it. That was the thought process that I had. I think I might have been watching some monkey training or some dog training episode or something. I tend to watch a lot of these, all right? Just random dog and animal videos. So I think I might have been watching something about dog training. If I'm not wrong, I think it was, how there are these voices that you just press the button and then it talks about words, it says words. Wow, it talks about words. It says words, and then these animals, they actually speak to you through that. Yeah, so they're trained that way, right? So I was like, okay, wow. So if this is a habit, that means I can train myself out of it. So this is what I did, and this is what I still do even to this day, and probably I will take this for the rest of my life, all right? So I came up with a sound to help me switch my mindset. All right, for me, it is a snap on my finger. For you, it could be anything, all right? It could be knocking on the table, knocking on wood, or making a click sound with your pen. For me, this was the most accessible. I'm not always around a pen, and this was I have my hands with me all the time, so I can just snap my fingers. All right, so for me, every time I recognized the negative self-talk, I would snap my fingers, and I knew I had to switch in that moment of time. I trained my mind to do this. I did this, I knew I was coming for this episode today, right? So last night, there was some negative talk that was going on in my mind. It started to form, and I was like, hey, and then that's it. I just stopped, and then I ended up focusing on the noise, and then I switched my thought process to something that was healthy. So for me, this particular noise, it distracts me, and I focus on it, and then I get back to the thought process. That gives me enough time. It's just a few seconds, but it gives me enough time to reframe that thought process and make it more healthy, make it more kinder, make it more compassionate. All right. So for you, it could be anything. For me, the snap works, and it's become a reflex at this point. So if you just are around me sometimes and you just randomly see me, snap, yeah, you know the reason why, all right? And this has happened before as well. Out of the blue, I'll just snap, but that's because there's an internal thought process that's working against me, and I know it. And this is just my way of saying, nope, snap out of it, out. All right. So Sometimes I'm like, and so there are different ways that you can go about it. But I found that the sound helps me shift because I've trained my mind to do that. So for you, it could be whatever it is that works for you, whatever you have easy access to at all times, right? So because this one, like I'm sleeping, this was when I was in bed, I was putting my head on my pillow, and then the thought was forming. I could feel it forming, and I couldn't get up to like do a pen click or something, right? So this is just, I was like, my hands were like this, and I was just like, I didn't even have to like raise it up or something like that. So I was like, hey, this is I can talk about this in tomorrow's podcast episode because I'm still doing it. It's a very, very real thing that I do, and I was like so happy that I did that. But of course, it happens on a very, very subconscious. But when I first started doing this, like training my mind, of course, like with any training, you've got to be patient with yourself. You will have a few slip-ups, you will have a few stumbles, but after a point, the moment your mind hears whatever sound you've allocated, it will automatically do whatever you have intended it to do. It's kind of like how Sheldon was training Penny with chocolates. It's the same. It's absolutely the same. Your mind is trainable, so you just have to find the right noise, the trigger, to train it and to shift it. All right, it's a habit. Remember, this negative self-talk, it's not who you are, it is a habit. And if it is a habit, you have learned it, and if you have learned it, you can unlearn it. All right, so there are different ways to unlearn it. For me, this is one of the ways that have worked so well for me. And for me, like I said, it took me some time to train myself. So be kind, be patient with yourself as you do that. Now, the next part of what I want to talk to you about is a little bit more deeper, So I started working on myself and started, creating this healthy relationship with myself. And what happens when you start doing that is, because the relationships that you have outside in some respect mirror the relationship that you have with yourself, and you start having a healthier relationship with yourself, you start recognizing some relationships that are not going to be healthy for you, right? It automatically, that dissonance actually happens very, very automatically. So at that moment, as you build a healthy relationship with yourself, one of the things that will happen is the relationships that no longer align with that will wash away. Either they will wash away or they will evolve and meet you where you are at. Most of mine washed away. All right, most of mine, I had to set boundaries because I would no longer accept them speaking that way to myself. I had to set boundaries. Some of them understood. Of course, I did it kindly. I did it patiently, did it with compassion because I understood where they were coming from. They were just mirroring my behavior, right? The behavior that I was exhibiting to myself. So they were just mirroring that. But now I was no longer doing that, so I could not accept it from them. So they needed to know that there was a change in me, and so that they could, correct their behavior towards me accordingly. Some did. I'm very, very grateful to them. Others were very, very resistant, and whoever was resistant, gave them a couple of chances, and then I had to walk away. All right, so it's also important to recognize that as you start building a healthier relationship with yourself, this will happen. The relationships that are meant to be in your life will naturally evolve as you evolve, and they will align. The ones that you can't carry forth, they were only meant to come to that point with you, will wash away, right? Yes, I do understand that you will feel sad about it. I have felt sad about some of them, but I've also understood that there's a part of me that could no longer accept that equation anymore, all right? And it's bittersweet. First off, it talks about how much I've grown as a person. It's bitter because it's not like we didn't have great times or that I didn't care for them. It's just, it was not where I was at anymore. It could no longer align with where I was at anymore. Another thing that I started recognizing was the more healthier I got with the relationship with myself, more healthier relationships started aligning, like new healthier relationships started aligning. People I'd probably never even spoken to before suddenly started talking to me, and they had a very, very healthy relationship with themselves, So they were mirroring that. And even the relationship that I had with them was also very, very healthy. It was just amazing. It was just so wonderful for me to watch this because, as much as, there were few relationships that I had to let go and I was feeling sad about it, it actually made space for more aligned relationships to step into my life. And even the relationships that evolved with me, the people that evolved with me, I have so much of gratitude for them because they started to understand. And that also, they also were evolving, right? They were also on their path of self-love and healing. So even their relationship with themselves also started to improve. It's not that the people in my life, are always praising me or, have this forced positivity. No. When I am misaligned, they tell it to me in a way that is very, very kind, very, very compassionate, very, very healthy as well. And that is also the energy that I give back to them. That is what I mean by a healthy relationship. It's not that if they're harming themselves or if they're not doing something that is aligned, you have to voice your opinions, but there's a way to do it. And they've just been so affirming. They're constantly by my side. I just know that I can rely on them. I just know that they're always, they've just got my back. Whatever it is, they've always got my back. Another thing that and I think you would have noticed as I started talking about this, is I started to change my dictionary or started to change the words in my dictionary when it came to my thoughts. It was no longer good or bad or right or wrong. It became aligned or misaligned. Is this aligned to the version of myself that I want to be? Is this misaligned to the version of myself that I want to be? And that by itself also helped me kind of slowly and gently evolve as well. And I continue to evolve. I mean, like I said, it is a lifelong process, but just asking myself that question rather than saying, oh, is this right? Is this wrong? No. I wasn't that harsh with myself. It was just, is it misaligned or is it aligned? And even if there's something that I do and it's misaligned, the conversation that I have with myself today is not, oh, that was wrong, you can't do that, or that is wrong, do better. No, it's, that was misalignment. All right, what we want to align to is this. All right, so let's see, how do we shift that? Even the tone that I speak with myself changed over time, rather than, constantly berating myself and constantly being loud and, trying to shut down the inner voice that always had unconditional love. So even the tone that I started using with myself changed a lot over these years. I think you can make out in the switch that I made. I was like, that's misalignment. All right, so we want to align to this. How do we get there? What should you have done differently in order to align? So even changing some words in my dictionary helped me a lot as well. All right. Now what I'm gonna do is, I'm looking at my 3D part of the notes. My 5D's on this page, but my 3D part of the notes is, take a look at the environment that you're in. All right. Understand that as you grow, you will have to let go of things that are not serving you anymore, and that is a natural part of the process. As painful as it will be to let go, know that you are allowing space for healthier relationships to step into your life. You are stepping into alignment for the, I guess I would say, relationships that are more fulfilling, that align to who you are today, right? Because whatever relationship that you have with yourself, it is mirrored externally in the situations that you go through, in the environment that you're in, the people that you interact with. Every single aspect of it, it is mirrored. The relationship that you have with yourself is the most important one. It is the foundational relationship for everything else that is happening in your life, all right? And so if you are, and I actually have that as a post-it on my wall over there, it's like, if you're disappointed about some aspect of your life, or if you're feeling something's off, maybe someone's talking or berating you, or someone's, projecting that negative energy onto you, there's always some misalignment in the relationship that you have with yourself that needs some correction over there. Only and only then will either that energy dissipate because you become misaligned to that energy, or you will become aligned in your energy so strong that you will set boundaries for yourself. So every single thing that is happening in your life, every single relationship that you have is fundamentally built on the relationship that you have with yourself. And that is why it is so, so important to make sure that you have a very, very healthy, very, very strong one with yourself, one that is built on unconditional love, kindness, and compassion. Because the moment you have that with yourself, you're able to kind of give that energy to other aspects of your life as well, to other relationships. And that by itself creates a healthier dynamic, right? Okay, what I'm gonna do is the camera is running, not the camera is running out, the battery is running out. I'm gonna change the battery and then we will get into the 5D aspect of this, all right? Like I said, this is going to be quite a long episode because I wanna make sure that I'm breaking down every single aspect of it. For me, this has been one of the biggest, it is actually the biggest lesson that I have been through in my life. And it has also been one of the toughest, probably the toughest one, because I had to shift the relationship that I had with myself, and it was so far gone that to bring it back to where it was today, it took a lot of trial and error. It took a lot of, I don't know, motivation within me to keep going. And there were so many stumbles across the path. There was so many stumbles I can't even begin to tell you. So I don't want it to feel like this was just a single hop or a jump or a step. For me, no, there were so many steps that came in between. There was a lot of pain to get to where I am with respect to my relationship with myself. And I hope that by sharing this with you, it helps you feel better, especially during the moments where you're struggling with this, or, you have to be more intentional about it, or the stumbles that you will eventually face on this path, as you align, as you correct. I just hope that me sharing this much detail will help you recognize that it's part of the process. It's not that there's something wrong with you or something like that. No, it's part of the process. It's a very, very natural part of the process. You're building a very, very new connection with yourself. You're building a relationship from scratch, and that takes time, that takes effort, that takes hard work, that takes a lot of intentionality as well. All right? Okay, let me change the camera. No, I said this for the second time. Let me change the battery and then we will get back to the 5D aspect of this, all right? Alrighty, now let's talk about the 5D version of handling negative self-talk, or even stopping it as well. So there is a concept that is called the higher self. This is our highest state of consciousness. As you all know, we are souls living a human experience, right? And as souls living a human experience, we operate at different frequencies. These frequencies can be kind of moved around depending on the situation that we're in, relationship that we're in, our past trauma. Maybe it could also be dependent upon the fears that come in, our thought processes at that point in time, our behavioral patterns, so on and so forth. There can be different frequencies for different aspects of our lives as well, for even different relationships of our lives. So it's all about frequency when it comes to the 5D aspect of it. Now, when you are engaging with negative self-talk, that's coming from a place of fear, or that's coming from a place of survival, a defense mechanism. That's also your ego stepping in as well, right? So when we are engaging with negative self-talk, we're actually in a very, very low vibrational state. When we are in low vibrational state, what happens is we tend to attract things that are low vibrational as well. It just automatically happens. That is the part, or that is the concept of manifestation as well, right? When you are in low vibrational state, you attract everything that is low vibrational. It's not the universe harming you or hurting you or wanting to punish you. No, it's just attracting who you are. And who you are when you are engaging in negative self-talk is a very, very low vibrational state. There is a version of you that exists, that definitely does exist. It's not a future version of you. It is just the version of you with the highest frequency, right? And that is called your higher self. Now, your higher self, because of the frequency that it embodies, it's the highest frequency, right? There is deep unconditional love. There is, deep kindness and compassion in that energy. There is also the energy where it looks at you with wholeness, not through broken lens of fear or insecurities, so on and so forth. All right. And like I said, it's not a future version of you. It's just a frequency that exists that you can tap into. All right. You have to align to. That's what it is. You align to that highest frequency by either shifting your thoughts, by shifting your behavioral patterns that are not serving you, that are not in alignment, by aligning with what feels like peace. All right? That is how you align with your higher self. And the reason why I gravitated towards this concept is because to me, it felt like, okay, well, I don't have to put unconditional love, like I don't have to pull it out of nowhere, unconditional love or kindness. There's a version of me that exists. I just have to tap into that frequency. All right. So for me, it wasn't like, okay, it was like out of nowhere. No, it exists. I just have to tap into that. I just have to align to that. All right. So when we align with our higher self, all right, it is first off the most magical experience, right? And it's about tapping into that frequency state where things flow and you are on the path of alignment and you are on the path that is most peaceful of all. Yes, there will be transformations that are meant to happen. Yes, sometimes it can be painful as well as you are on that path, but it is the most peaceful of all of them. All right. And especially when you are connected to the frequency of your higher self, it feels like you are being guided because for me, she is the source of utmost wisdom as well because she sees me through wholeness. She knows my soul's purpose. She knows my soul's path. All right. The same would be for you and your higher self. All right. So for me, when I align with my higher self, in those moments or in those periods of my life for that particular phase or for that particular aspect of my life, I find that there is a lot of peace that I feel within myself. And I feel like I'm guided through life, not pulled or forced into learning lessons. The lessons do come, yes, sometimes they're painful as well, but there is a certain ease to moving through the lessons, right? And this is why even now consciously as well, I try my best to align with the frequency of my higher self. Every time I feel misalignment, I feel that internal chaos within me, I always ask myself, okay, well, if I have to align with the frequency of my higher self, how would I do that? Or how can I align with that frequency? How do I tap into that unconditional love, kindness, compassion, wisdom that already exists? It's there for me. I just have to tap into that energy, right? So that automatically calms me down. For me, I think connecting with my higher self, I think that there are different methods to go about it. I think that there are different ways. And I also think that it is highly, highly individualistic. But just recognizing that there is a version of you with the highest frequency ever possible, and that energy is there for you to tap into, that has helped me so many times. So every time, let's talk about negative self-talk because your higher self can come through for other aspects of your life as well, and you can align with her for different aspects of your life. Like I said, your soul's frequency is very, very individualistic, right? Depending on what you're going through, your thoughts at that particular time. So connecting with your higher self is an intentional effort. You have to put in that effort to align with your higher self, right? So with respect to negative self-talk, one thing that I have understood about my higher self is she is so compassionate. Like there is a depth to her love, to her unconditional love. And that is what I try to embody for myself. So every time I'm talking to myself and I feel that negative self-talk coming through, I ask myself, I pause, center myself, and I ask myself, all right, well, I know that my negative self-talk is low vibration, right? So how do I shift into the highest vibration? If my higher self were to come through right now, what would she tell me? How would she show up? How would she see this situation? That by itself helps me first detach from my own thought process and it allows me to connect to a higher frequency. It allows me to align to a higher frequency. All right. So one thing that I wish to tell you is your higher self, given it is the highest frequency, the voice also is actually the lowest. Your ego self, the one that comes through because of fear, of insecurities, is the loudest that is out there, because the lower the vibration, the higher actually is the voice in your mind, the panic that you feel, the anxiety that you feel. It's a little bit on the flip side, but that's also how you know. All right. So your higher self, the voice is very, very quiet. It's very patient, very kind, very low. It's very soothing as well. And so to access that voice, you've got to calm the screaming as well, right? You've got to put aside the screaming, got to center yourself, you've got to quieten your mind so that you can tap into that very low and very gentle voice. So that is one way that has worked personally for me. Anytime I feel like anxiety is rising with me, or panic, or I'm like my head, the voice in my head is screaming, I recognize that, oh, okay, that's not my higher self. That's probably my ego self stepping in. I need to shift into the quieter aspect. I need to tap into that energy. I need to quieten my mind so that I can reach, or that voice can reach me, because that voice always exists. I just have to quieten my mind so that I can hear it. All right? So that is something about the higher self that, I feel like I've studied so much about the higher self that I'm a bit nervous about what to share, because there's just so much about it, and I don't want to complicate things just yet for you. But at the same time, I want to make sure that you are understanding how to tap into that energy. I feel like a different podcast episode where I dive deeper into it would be helpful. So I'm just like, if you feel that I'm talking a little bit slower, it's because I'm trying to like mentally segregate, okay, what do I talk about? What would not overwhelm? So on and so forth. And of course, you can always like increase the speed of the YouTube video, right? So yeah, if you feel that I'm talking a little bit slower with respect to this topic, it's just that I actually talk about this a lot, but it's very, very deep. So I'm just like kind of saying, okay, well, what is not going to be overwhelming? What is going to be overwhelming at this point? We'll probably get deeper into this as time goes, right? So when it comes to tapping into the frequency of your higher self, just know that, wherever there are flaws or missteps, there is no shame, but there is unconditional acceptance there. So tapping into that energy would help, all right? Another thing is that your higher self is very, very wise and very loving. And, they are a guide for you, because they know your soul's path. They know your soul's purpose. So every time you're feeling lost in life, you can always, ask your higher self. You can always try to tap into that frequency, and you will align. It just takes a little bit of effort. It takes a little bit of centering yourself, but you will align, right? And for me, I think the way that I perceive it, there are different ways to perceive it, but the way that I perceive it, and probably I'll talk about this in detail, is that my higher self is a version that exists, that I can ask for guidance anytime, right? And she's always there. She's just unconditionally there for me. And so for me, it's more of an external entity, all right? But that's just how I handle the relationship with my higher self. And so I'm tapping into her energy. That's how I access her knowledge. That's how I access her unconditional love and kindness and compassion, whether it's for myself or for the people around me, for the situation that I'm in, the guidance, and so on and so forth. All right. But I'll talk about this deeper in another podcast episode, because there's so much that I want to talk about it. But yeah, for me, just to wrap up this entire episode, I think that when we are handling negative self-talk, there's a part of us that's constantly asking to feel worthy. That's where it comes from at the end of it. And I think that there's just so much of energy that goes into that, and it actually drains us at the end of it. However, when we step into an energy where we are showing ourselves unconditional love, kindness, compassion, and we're building a healthier relationship with ourselves, I think that the fulfillment that we feel, it comes from within, and we're no longer looking for it externally. And I think that's also how it shifts the relationships that we have, the situations that we find ourselves in, because that fulfillment comes from within. We're no longer looking for it externally. We're no longer putting that pressure on other people or other situations. And I think that's also how we feel peace coming from within. So I think that it does tie a lot, the conversations that you have with yourself, because first off, the person who speaks the most to you is actually yourself, all right? So the relationship that you have with yourself also is heavily dependent on that. And the more you can find that unconditional love, kindness, and compassion from within you, the more we stop looking for it outside, and the more we start embodying it. And that also shifts the energy of the relationships that we have with the people in our lives, as well as the energy of the circumstances. Even if the circumstance doesn't change, we're embodying a frequency, we're embodying an energy that helps us handle the situation with wisdom, with utmost love, kindness, and compassion. All right? So this is where I will leave you for today. I feel like we spoke a lot about 3D, and also we kind of tapped a bit into 5D. If you want me to talk more about higher self and my relationship with my higher self, so on and so forth, it's very, very deep. I think that I've spent a lot of years actually honing my relationship. And for me, like I said, it is, the way that I perceive it is an external entity, but a frequency that I can tap into. All right, and I can access, and a frequency that I can align with, a frequency that I can embody. All right, that is how it has helped me. So if you want me to talk more about that, I can definitely do. Like I said, I talk a lot about it. I talk a lot about higher self and ego self and so on and so forth, like 5D and 3D self. So I'm just struggling a little bit in this episode, because I'm just like, okay, well, what's too much and what's not overwhelming? What, can just kind of give you a glimpse of it, kind of help you understand it, but at the same time not overwhelm you. So yeah, that's where I'm at with respect to this particular episode. All right, so overall, I really hope that this podcast episode gave you a good starting point to kind of reevaluate the relationship that you have with yourself, and gave you a good starting point to create a healthy relationship with yourself, because I truly believe that the relationship that you have with yourself is the foundation for every other relationship, as well as every single thing that you go through in your life. It is the foundation to all of that. All right? Okay, this is where I will leave you for today. I really hope that this episode gave you some clarity about what you're going through. And yeah, I wish you well, and I'll catch you in my next one. Bye-bye.